house in a place easily found. To have actually hidden it in his room would have been a little too much for the police to swallow. The murder was committed at a time when Bentley was taking a lonely walk, as he often did. Did the blood stain come on his sleeve, as he said it did at his trial, or was that too contrived? Did someone brush against him in the darkness and smear telltale evidence on his sleeve? I think that's going a bit far, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps, but we have got to go far. I think that in this case we have got to go so far that the imagination cannot as yet see the path clearly. For you see, mon cher Spence, if Mrs. McGinty is just an ordinary charwoman, it is the murderer who must be extraordinary. Yes, that follows clearly. It is in the murderer, and not the murdered, that the interest of this case lies. That is not the case in most crimes. Usually, it is in the personality of the murdered person that the crux of the situation lies. It is the silent dead in whom I am usually interested. Their hates, their loves, their actions, and when you really know the murdered victim, then the victim speaks, and those dead lips utter a name, the name you want to know. Spence looked rather uncomfortable. Those foreigners, he seemed to be saying to himself. But here, continued Poirot, it is the opposite. Here we guess at a veiled personality, a figure still hidden in darkness. How did Mrs. McGinty die? Why did she die? The answer is not to be found in studying the life of Mrs. McGinty. The answer is to be found in the personality of the murderer. You agree with me there? I suppose so, said Superintendent Spence cautiously. Someone who wanted what? To strike down Mrs. McGinty or to strike down James Bentley? The superintendent gave a doubtful, Yes, that is one of the first points to be decided. Who is the real victim? Who was intended to be the victim? Spence said incredulously, You really think someone would bump off a perfectly inoffensive old woman in order to get someone else hanged for murder? One cannot make an omelette, they say, without breaking eggs. Mrs. McGinty, then, may be the egg, and James Bentley is the omelette. So let me hear now what you know of James Bentley. Well, nothing much. Father was a doctor, died when Bentley was 9 years old. He went to one of the smaller public schools, unfit for the army, had a weak chest, was in one of the ministries during the war, and lived with a possessive mother. Well, said Poirot, there are certain possibilities there, more than there are in the life history of Mrs. McGinty. Do you seriously believe what you're suggesting? No, I do not believe anything as yet. But I say that there are two distinct lines of research, and that we have to decide very soon which is the right one to follow. How are you going to set about things, Monsieur Poirot? Is there anything I can do? First, I should like an interview with James Bentley. Well, that can be arranged. I'll get on to his solicitors. After that, and subject, of course, to the result, if any, I am not hopeful of that interview, I shall go to Broadhinny. There, aided by your notes, I shall, as quickly as possible, go over that same ground where you have passed before me. In case I've missed anything, said Spence with a wry smile. In case, I would prefer to say that some circumstance should strike me in a different light to the one in which it struck you. Human reactions may vary, and so does human experience. The resemblance of a rich financier to a soap boiler, whom I had known in Liège once, brought about a most satisfactory result. But no need to go into that. What I should like to do is to eliminate one or other of the trails I indicated just now. And to eliminate the Mrs. McGinty trail, trail number 1 will obviously be quicker and easier than to attack trail number 2. Where, now, can I stay in Broadhinny? Is there an inn of moderate comfort? There's the Three Ducks, but it doesn't put people up. There's the Lamb in Calaven, 3 miles away, or there is a kind of guest-house in Broadhinny itself. It's not really a guest-house, just a rather decrepit country house where the young couple who own it take in paying guests. I don't think, said Spence dubiously, that it's very comfortable. Hercule Poirot closed his eyes in agony. If I suffer, I suffer, he said. It has to be. "I don't know what you'll go there as," continued Spence doubtfully as he eyed Poirot. "Oh, you might be some kind of an opera singer, voice broken down, got to rest. That might do." "I shall go," said Hercule Poirot, speaking with accents of royal blood, "as myself." Spence received this pronouncement with pursed lips. "Do you think that's advisable?" "I think it is essential, but yes, essential. Consider, cher ami, it is time we are up against. What do we know? Nothing. So the best hope, is to go pretending that I know a great deal. I am Hercule Poirot. I am the great, the unique Hercule Poirot, and I, Hercule Poirot, am not satisfied about the verdict in the McGinty case. I, Hercule Poirot, have a very shrewd suspicion of what really happened. There is a circumstance that I, alone, estimate at its true value, you see? And then, having made my effect, I observe the reactions. For there should be reactions. Very definitely, there should be reactions." Superintendent Spence looked uneasily at the little man. "Look here, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "Don't go sticking out your neck. I don't want anything to happen to you. But if it does, you would be proved right, beyond the shadow of doubt, is it not so?" "I don't want it proved the hard way," said Inspector Spence. With great distaste, Hercule Poirot looked round the room in which he stood. It was a room of gracious proportions, but there its attraction ended. Poirot made an eloquent grimace as he drew a suspicious finger along the top of a bookcase. As he had suspected, dust. He sat down gingerly on a sofa, and its broken springs sagged depressingly under him. The two faded armchairs were, as he knew, little better. A large, fierce-looking dog, whom Poirot suspected of having mange, growled from his position on a moderately comfortable fourth chair. The room was large, and had a faded Morris wallpaper. Steel engravings of unpleasant subjects hung crookedly on the walls, with one or two good oil paintings. The chair covers were both faded and dirty. The carpet had holes in it, and had never been of a pleasant design. A good deal of miscellaneous bric-a-brac was scattered haphazardly here and there. Tables rocked dangerously owing to the absence of casters. One window was open, and no power on earth could apparently shut it again. The door, temporarily shut, was not likely to remain so. The latch did not hold, and with every gust of wind it burst open, and whirling gusts of cold wind eddied round the room. "I suffer," said Hercule Poirot to himself, in acute self-pity. "Yes, I suffer." The door burst open, and the wind and Mrs. Summerhays came in together. She looked round the room, shouted, "What?" to someone in the distance, and went out again. Mrs. Summerhays had red hair, and an attractively freckled face, and was usually in a distracted state of putting things down, or else looking for them. Hercule Poirot sprang to his feet and shut the door. A moment or two later it opened again, and Mrs. Summerhays reappeared. This time she was carrying a large enamel basin and a knife. A man's voice from somewhere away called out, "Maureen, that cat's been sick again. What shall I do?" Mrs. Summerhays called out, "I'm coming, darling. Hold everything." She dropped the basin and the knife and went out again. Poirot got up again and shut the door. He said, "Decidedly, I suffer." A car drove up. The large dog leapt from the chair and raised its voice in a crescendo of barking. He jumped on a small table by the window, and the table collapsed with a crash. "Enfin," said Hercule Poirot, "c'est insupportable." The door burst open, the wind surged round the room, the dog rushed out, still barking. Maureen's voice came, upraised, loud and clear. "Johnny, why the hell did you leave the back door open? Those bloody hens are in the larder!" "And for this," said Hercule Poirot with feeling, "I pay 7 guineas a week." The door banged to with a crash. Through the window came the loud squawking of irate hens. Then the door opened again, and Maureen Summerhays came in and fell upon the basin with a cry of joy. "Couldn't think where I'd left it. Would you mind frightfully, would it bother you if I sliced the beans in here? The smell in the kitchen is too frightful. Madame, I should be enchanted." It was not perhaps the exact phrase, but it was near enough. It was the first time in 24 hours that Poirot had seen any chance of a conversation of more than 6 seconds' duration. Mrs. Summerhays flung herself down in a chair and began slicing beans with frenzied energy and considerable awkwardness. "I do hope," she said, "that you're not too frightfully uncomfortable. If there's anything you want altered, do say so." Poirot had already come to the opinion that the only thing in Long Meadows he could even tolerate was his hostess. "You are too kind, madame," he replied politely. "I only wish it were within my powers to provide you with suitable domestics." "Domestics?" Mrs. Summerhays gave a squeal. "What a hope! Can't even get hold of a daily. Our really good one was murdered. Just my luck." "That would be Mrs. McGinty," said Poirot quickly. "Mrs. McGinty it was. God, how I missed that woman. Of course, it was all a big thrill at the time, first murder we've had right in the family, so to speak, but as I told Johnny, it was a downright bit of bad luck for us. Without McGinty, I just can't cope." "You were attached to her?" "My dear man, she was reliable. She came. Monday afternoons and Thursday mornings, just like a clock. Now I have that Burke woman from up by the station, 5 children and a husband. Naturally, she's never here. Either the husband's taken queer, or the old mother, or the children have some foul disease or other. With old McGinty, at least it was only she herself who came over queer, and I must say, she hardly ever did." "And you found her always reliable and honest? You had trust in her?" "Oh, she'd never pinch anything, not even food. Of course, she snooped a bit, had a look at one's letters and all that, but one expects that sort of thing. I mean, they must live such awfully drab lives, mustn't they?" "Had Mrs. McGinty had a drab life?" "Ghastly, I expect," said Mrs. Summerhays vaguely. "Always on your knees, scrubbing, then piles of other people's washing up waiting for you in the sink when you arrive in the morning. If I had to face that every day, I'd be positively relieved to be murdered, I really would." The face of Major Summerhays appeared at the window. Mrs. Summerhays sprang up, upsetting the beans, and rushed across to the window, which she opened to the fullest extent. "That damned dog's eaten the hen's food again, Maureen. Oh, damn, now he'll be sick. Look here." John Summerhays displayed a colander full of greenery. "Is this enough spinach?" "Well, of course not." "Seems a colossal amount to me." "It'll be about a teaspoonful when it's cooked. Don't you know by now what spinach is like?" "Oh, Lord." "Has the fish come?" "Not a sign of it." "Hell, we'll have to open a tin of something. You might do that, Johnny. One of the ones in the corner cupboard. That one we thought was a bit bulged. I expect it's quite all right, really." "What about the spinach?" "I'll get that." She leapt through the window, and husband and wife moved away together. "Nom d'un, nom," said Hercule Poirot. He crossed the room and closed the window as nearly as he could. The voice of Major Summerhays came to him borne on the wind. "What about this new fellow, Maureen? Looks a bit peculiar to me. What's his name again?" "I couldn't remember it just now when I was talking to him. Had to say Mr. Poirot. That's what it is. He's French." "You know, Maureen, I seem to have seen that name somewhere. Home Perm, perhaps? He looks like a hairdresser." Poirot winced. "No. Perhaps it's Pickles. I don't know. I'm sure it's familiar. Better get the first 7 guineas out of him, quick." The voices died away. Hercule Poirot picked up the beans from the floor where they had scattered far and wide. Just as he finished doing so, Mrs. Summerhays came in again through the door. He presented them to her politely. "Voici, madame." "Oh, thanks awfully. I say, these beans look a bit black. We store them, you know, in crocks, salted down, but these seem to have gone wrong. I'm afraid they won't be very nice." "I, too, fear that—" "You permit that I shut the door? There is a decided draught." "Oh, yes, do. I'm afraid I always leave doors open." "So I have noticed. Anyway, that door never stays shut. The house is practically falling to pieces. Johnny's father and mother lived here, and they were badly off, poor dears, and they never did a thing to it. And then, when we came home from India to live here, we couldn't afford to do anything either. It's fun for the children in the holidays, though. Lots of room to run wild in, and the garden and everything. Having paying guests here just enables us to keep going, though I must say we've had a few rude shocks." "Am I your only guest at present?" "We've got an old lady upstairs, took to her bed the day she came, and has been there ever since. Nothing the matter with her that I can see, but there she is, and I carry up 4 trays a day. Nothing wrong with her appetite. Anyway, she's going tomorrow to some niece or other." Mrs. Summerhays paused for a moment, before resuming in a slightly artificial voice, "The fish man will be here in a minute. I wonder if you'd mind forking out the first week's rent. You are staying a week, aren't you?" perhaps longer. Sorry to bother you, but I've not got any cash in the house, and you know what these people are like, always dunning you. Pray do not apologize, madame. Poirot took out £7 notes and added 7 shillings. Mrs. Summerhays gathered the money up with avidity. Thanks a lot. I should perhaps, madame, tell you a little more about myself. I am Hercule Poirot. The revelation left Mrs. Summerhays unmoved. What a lovely name, she said kindly. Greek, isn't it? I am, as you may know, said Poirot, a detective. He tapped his chest. Perhaps the most famous detective there is. Mrs. Summerhays screamed with amusement. I see you're a great practical joker, Monsieur Poirot. What are you detecting? Cigarette ash and footprints? I am investigating the murder of Mrs. McGinty, said Poirot, and I do not joke. Ouch, said Mrs. Summerhays. I've cut my hand. She raised a finger and inspected it. Then she stared at Poirot. Look here, she said. Do you mean it? What I mean is, it's all over, all that. They arrested that poor half-wit who lodged there, and he's been tried and convicted and everything. He's probably been hanged by now. No, madame, said Poirot. He has not been hanged. Yet. And it is not over. The case of Mrs. McGinty. I will remind you of the line from one of your poets. A question is never settled until it is settled right. Ooh, said Mrs. Summerhays, her attention diverted from Poirot to the basin in her lap. I'm bleeding over the beans. Not too good, as we've got to have them for lunch. Still, it won't matter, really, because they'll go into boiling water. Things are always all right if you boil them, aren't they? Even tins. I think, said Hercule Poirot quietly, that I shall not be in for lunch. I don't know, I'm sure, said Mrs. Birch. She had said that 3 times already. Her natural distrust of foreign-looking gentlemen with black moustaches wearing large, fur-lined coats was not to be easily overcome. Very unpleasant it's been, she went on, having poor auntie murdered, and the police and all that, tramping round everywhere, ferreting about and asking questions, with the neighbours all agog. I didn't feel at first we'd ever live it down, and my husband's mother's been downright nasty about it. Nothing of that kind ever happened in her family, she kept saying. And poor Joe, and all that. What about poor me? She was my aunt, wasn't she? But really, I did think it was all over now. And supposing that James Bentley is innocent after all? Nonsense, snapped Mrs. Birch. Of course he isn't innocent. He did it all right. I never did like the looks of him, wandering about muttering to himself. Said to auntie I did, you oughtn't to have a man like that in the house. Might go off his head, I said. But she said he was quiet and obliging, and didn't give trouble. No drinking, she said, and he didn't even smoke. Well, she knows better now, poor soul. Poirot looked thoughtfully at her.